Good afternoon. This is half of West San Gabriel Valley Association of Realtors and the Education Committee. We welcome you to this meeting. Today's topic is NHD, and it stands for Hazard Disclosure. I've done a while, a long time ago, when I was doing real estate, when I'm in doubt of not what to do, I always disclose, and I think that's a safety cap should inform the buyers of the risks that are involved when they are buying their home. You act as a professional realtor, you show them out, and then this is something that's very important. NHD goes to the seller or buyers that there is something associated with this property that you might be unfamiliar with. So here, it helps to determine the California homes that you are buying or selling, whether it was located in a particular hazardous area. And we are very fortunate today to have invited Mr. Rob Noble to come and give us a very informative and educational seminar. Without further ado, I'm going to have Cecilia introduce our speakers. Cecilia.
Yes. Hi, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Cecilia of Coldwell Banker George Realty in Alhambra. Today, our commercial seminar will talk about the NHD requirements in California, and in which you will learn how the transaction requiring NHD reports, commercial NHD requirements, what is in the report, commercial tax report, commercial environmental report, and new commercial lease report as well. Our keynote speaker, Rob Noble, he as the commercial manager at MyNHD, Rob oversees sales for all MyNHD commercial disclosures reports in California and is responsible for the strategic plan to grow the division. Rob is passionate about providing personal and impeccable service to his clients, developing personal relationships with many of the clients he was worked with over the 20 years he has been in the disclosure industry, providing education on disclosures, natural hazards, new laws that realtors need to be aware of, and changes in hazard zones is something that Rob takes great pride in. Passing along knowledge that will help a client with their business and provide liability protection is something that Rob enjoys greatly. Rob works with commercial realtors and brokers, commercial escrow companies and attorneys, and residential realtors who sell commercial properties. Rob has extensive experience in the disclosure industry, working in positions from management, new homes, and customer service. Let's welcome with Rob Noble. Hi, Rob, please take it away.
Thank you very much, Cecilia. Let me go ahead and share my screen. And I want to make sure, let's see. Cecilia, did you just see my presentation or do you also see my notes? Okay, then I need
both.
I need to change that. Hold on just a second. Just give me a second. I think when we switched things up, it messed it up. So let's see. Now you see the presentation?
Yes.
And all the same?
The same page.
Okay, perfect. Then I got it where I need to be. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'll try and keep it brief. I know natural hazard disclosures are probably not the most exciting thing that you guys get to learn about all the time in that, stack of paperwork that you have to put together for your deals. But it's a very important part, and it's one I've been a part of, like Cecilia said, for over 22 years now. I started in subdivision and then I was in residential, and for the last 8 years I've been on the commercial side of things. And in that time, I've seen the disclosures required change quite a bit. Interestingly enough, though, is that commercial requirements for natural hazard disclosures have pretty much stayed the same since the law's inception back in 1998. Since I've been on the commercial disclosure side of the NHD business, I've actually been surprised at how many times I've been asked if commercial sales require an NHD here in California. Well, the answer to that is definitely yes, but let me take you through it a little bit. So transactions requiring the NHD report here in California, well, it's all real property. And that's what the civil code law states, all real property. And it highlights commercial and industrial, also includes residential, of course, which includes mobile homes. We run into a lot of agents and sometimes attorneys who think that mobile homes are not required to disclose. Absolutely they are. Vacant land, farmland, basically any sale of real property in California requires an NHD report in some manner. Okay, there are different requirements for residential versus commercial, industrial, and we'll go through that as well. So when I've been asked that question by real estate attorneys, and I'm actually surprised that I get this question from California attorneys that don't think that it's required for commercial, but also out of state, which that's more understandable, or commercial brokers and agents. I always send them a couple things. First is an article written after the law was passed in 1998 by the California Bar Journal. I highlight where it states that the disclosure requirements apply to all real estate transactions, including commercial property transactions. Now, this is the attorney's newsletter. This is their State Bar Journal newsletter. So this really hits it to them and says, okay, this is what the law says. This comes from our own Bar Journal. So that really hits home to them. I also provide the sales disclosure chart from CAR. Now, if you've never seen this, it's awesome for a knowledge-based thing or for education, residential, commercial, mobile homes, whatever type of property you're selling. This sale disclosure chart, and this is something that Cecilia, I can also provide to you guys, and you can email out to anybody that needs it. But being CAR members, you can just go on the website and find it yourself as well, but I can get it easier for you. I highlight the commercial, industrial, and vacant land column because that's what we're talking about here, and that's what my clients are talking about. And then I also highlight the names of the disclosures, and then also the civil code and government codes that they apply to. So you can go scroll right down this report, and it's going to show you everything that you need to disclose for that property type that you are selling. So once I send both of these things to the people that are questioning if commercial is required, I pretty much win, the argument as far as that goes. And I can also send them a couple more articles from other real estate attorneys. But that kind of settles the debate. It's definitely any real property, commercial, industrial, farmland, vacant land, zone for commercial properties. Anything that's a real property being sold in California is going to need an NHD in some sort of capacity. So for commercial sales in California, there are only 6 mandatory disclosures required by Civil Code. Like I said in the beginning, this has not changed over the last 20 plus years as residential disclosures has. They are exactly the same as residential's 6 mandatory state disclosures. It's just that residential sales require much more. A good example of that is now the kind of confusing AB 38, the new fire maps that are required for residential properties, and the home hardening and the defensive space around the homes. And the maps are ever changing because not only because of the fires, but the different resources, whether it's the Department of Forestry or the local fire departments, Cal Fire, they're all making these maps, and we need to disclose that on residential. For commercial, that is not required by law. So it's really very important to know that the mandatory disclosures are the 6 state disclosures, and that's all you need to disclose for commercial. Okay, that's what's mandatory. So they've kept these 6 as the only mandatory disclosures for all these years, and then you leave it up to the buyers to do their due diligence after that. Now, does that mean that there aren't other things your clients may want to disclose on these commercial properties that, while are not mandatory, that they want to do that to protect themselves from liability? No, right? So I'll show you what else is available that may be important to you and your clients in a little bit. But in the interest of time, let's go through the 6 statutory disclosures and how they look. And if you've done residential sales, they're going to be exactly the same. Okay, so this might just be a re-education for you, but let's just go through them so we're on the same page. Excuse me. So the first one is the special flood hazard zone. This has to do with flood insurance. It's based on a 1% annual chance of being flooded with water at least 1 foot deep from severe storms. It's often referred to as the 100-year storm, or the 100-year flood zone, excuse me. This is a sample of what we use. We use aerial mapping, which is very, very precise. And then we layer the flood zones on top of that. And you can see the property in green, that's the rectangle there. And then you see the flood zone going in blue. And then we were able to make the determinations if it's affecting the property or not. So we love our aerial mapping, and hopefully so do you. It's very, very precise, the best in the industry. We're very, very excited about our mapping. So the second one is, I'm sorry, I skipped a page here. So what do you do? What happens if you're in that flood hazard zone? Well, if the property is going to require a mortgage to close, that lender is probably going to require flood insurance. And that's going to raise, what the monthly, price of that is for a potential client. So they're definitely going to want to know if they're in a FEMA flood zone. The buyer may be required to purchase this flood insurance. So have your buyer, and this is always, good advice, no matter what type of thing that the buyer is looking into. Make sure that they're looking into it. They can look to you for advice on where to go and stuff. But if they want to know if they can build something, or if they want to know if there's any restrictions, or if they need to know, what their insurance rates are going to be, that's really for them to do. Because if you ever make a mistake, they can come back to you and say, you told me this and it was wrong, and then trying to find you liable. So have your buyer contact their insurance company to determine the insurance requirements and the premiums. And it's definitely going to be more expensive if they have to have flood insurance if they're in one of these zones. So the second one is called an area of potential flooding, and we get this question all the time. Wait, I know I'm not in a flood zone. It says I'm not in a flood zone, but on the second question, it says I am in a flood zone, a potential flooding zone. Well, this doesn't have anything to do with FEMA flood zones or insurance. This has to do with the potential for a dam to fail. It's just that wording that the state put confuses people sometimes because it says flooding, but that's exactly what would happen if a dam were to fail. Now, the potential for dam failure is not high. Maps are based on instantaneous dam failure and that the reservoirs fill to capacity, which is not often the case, especially these last few decade or so. We've been in drought situations and still are. Thankfully, it's raining today. We had a little bit of rain a week or so ago. Hopefully it keeps coming, but it's based off of if they're at capacity and what's going to happen if that dam were to fail at capacity, and they've mapped these out. Now these dam maps are huge, and they go if a dam, and these dams are really big as well. So I live right in Riverside over here, right where the 91 and 71 come together, and that's Prado Dam. And Prado Dam almost failed about 10 years ago. And if it were to fail, it would have reached, I live in Corona, it would have reached my driveway where it was mapped, basically. But if it was at full capacity, that water is mapped to go from, the 9171 all the way to Long Beach into the ocean. So that's quite a distance that they map out for these dam, the potential for a dam failure. So people might be nervous about this. They'll see the map and they'll say, okay, my home's right in the middle of this. Lenders are not going to require flood insurance for potential flooding due to a dam failure. But if somebody is nervous about that, they can go to the same flood insurance companies and request flood insurance on their own. So somebody could be very nervous about this and say, nope, I'm just going to protect myself. They can optionally go and get flood insurance on their own if they're worried about something like this. And you can see our aerial mapping, very, very cool, kind of showing where the dam failure map flood zone goes through. So it gives them a nice visual as well. All right. So now we have our fire zones. So there's 2 zones that are mapped by the state. That's the high fire zone and the wildland fire zones. And they're both very high fire zones. And like I said before, these maps are constantly changing because of what's been going on with the fires here on the West Coast, especially here in California. They're both high fire zones, but it really talks about who's going to come put it out. So the high fire zones are mapped out by the local fire department authorities. So this is your urban areas, your local firehouses are going to be responsible for putting out the fires. And then your wildland zones sound just like it is. It's going to be more your rural areas, Big Bear, high desert, Lake Arrowhead type areas, Bakersfield type open areas. And that's the Department of Forestry that's put in charge of mapping that out, and also in charge of, making sure the mitigation is there, and burning down the foliage when it gets too big, and we're responsible for putting out the fires. And then they contract with each other as well if they don't have resources in the area, so they work really well together. So what if you're in one of these high fire zones? Well, it may be very difficult, especially in today's world, to obtain insurance for that buyer. Insurance will also be very expensive. The insurance companies are definitely raising their rates on it. Have your buyer contact the insurance company to determine their insurance requirements and premiums. And if they are having problems, which we've been hearing that there is issues with people getting insurance, or insurance companies are dropping longtime customers actually because they've expanded the fire zones, or they're in a fire zone now. There's the California Fair Plan that exists. It's www.cfpnet.com. And the buyer can go there to look for assistance on getting fire insurance if their insurance company has denied them. So it's one of those things California has put into place for that. Now, a little caveat to this is that we in the industry, not just MyNHD, but we need to provide by law the maps that have been approved by the fire authorities and that are, valid, that they've put up that said these are the maps you need to use. The insurance companies are using their own maps. So we've run into this too, where we've said, you're not in one of these high fire zones. You're not in this new AB 38 zone on a residential property. You don't need to do anything. And then the insurance company says, oh no, you are. Yes, you are in a zone, and your insurance rates are going up. And yes, we're going to insure you or not insure you due to this fact. People come to us, say your report's wrong. We'll double check and verify, no, the report is right. What's happening is these insurance companies are expanding the fire maps for their own purposes, whether it's for additional money or for liability reasons, or they don't agree with the fire authorities mapping. And so they've expanded the zones themselves. And so we can't do anything about that. So people sometimes are kind of upset, and we verify, nope, we did what we were supposed to do. It's a valid map. You're not in the zone according to California and the Department of Forestry. This is on your insurance company. So just know that could happen as well. And it's not anything that the NHD industry is doing. We're just doing what we're required to do by law, and that's protecting you as well. So this one's kind of our cross to bear. This is the earthquake fault zone. We get a lot of people from out of state that are really worried about this. It's not something that, again, we're going to do anything about. We just need to kind of tell them this is our cross to bear. East Coast has the hurricanes. The Midwest has tornadoes. We have the potential for earthquakes here. And I've seen the maps here in California, the big, small, mediums, they're all over the place, and they're constantly going off whether we're feeling them or not. Even if the report says you're not in an earthquake fault zone, you're probably pretty close to where a fault zone is, whether it's a small one or a large one or in between. So we just need to reassure our clients that it's just, California's got a lot of benefits. This is just one of the things that, people kind of have to worry about, if you want to live here. Discloses the potential for fault rupture and fault creep. Fault rupture is when it instantaneously bursts during an earthquake, the ground on top separates. And fault creep is when it just goes little by little by little by little over the years and many, many, many earthquakes. So that's what they map out. The California Geological Survey delineates, I can never say that word, zones at least 500 feet wide on both sides of an active fault. So if the fault's this big, they go 500 feet wide on one side, 500 feet wide on the other side, and then that's the active fault zone. So it's kind of like a 500-foot buffer on each side of the rupture, basically. And if you're within that, then there's going to be some things that you can't do with that property, right? And I'll talk about that in a minute. Here's our kind of squeezed out map. It looks a little pulled out, but this is again an aerial map with our state landslide area. Now, landslide does not mean that you are in, Malibu on a cliff. It can just be a very gradual type slope, or the potential for a landslide is there, or historical occurrences of landslides have occurred. That's how the state maps it out. And that's how the local governments map it out. We'll talk about that a little bit too. Then you have your liquefaction areas, and you do not have to be by the beach, and have, sand to be in the liquefaction area. Liquefaction is basically a quicksand-like effect that can take place in the soil. It's basically, sandy soils and saturated soils. You need an earthquake for this to actually happen. And what happens is with liquefaction type soils is it liquefies. It's like a quicksand-like effect in a structure, especially older structures that haven't had, some of these building code upgrades that have gone on over the years to kind of protect buildings from shifting on landslides or sinking in liquefaction areas. It can affect those types of structures. So that's why it's mandatory to disclose. Now, for liquefaction and landslide, only 20 to 25% of the state has been mapped by the state agencies. Riverside, about 15 years ago, my county was supposed to have been mapped. They still haven't done it, whether it's liability issues or the fact that a lot of city and counties have gone out and done their own, which we'll talk about too. The mapping is just not getting done by the state. So on that statutory form, those 6 questions that's mandatory for residential and commercial, that's going to be the only question that says yes, no, and map not yet available by the state. So you'll see that one mapped out, or you'll see that box checked. Most of LA, Orange County, parts of Ventura, San Diego's been mapped, I think most of San Diego. And that's it. The rest of the state, portions have been mapped, but most hasn't. So just know that that's the reasoning why. So what happens if you're in one of these zones, and that's an earthquake fault zone, a landslide, or a liquefaction zone? All 3 of these zones, it can affect new construction wholeheartedly, and it really depends on the city and their building codes and their restrictions. Your buyer may not be able to build. If they want to build, if it's an existing structure and they want to build the casita in the backyard or a pool or anything, they might not be able to build. There might be restrictions, and construction codes and costs will be significantly higher if they're in one of these zones. So have your buyer, again, if they're interested in that and they're interested in that a certain property that's in one of these zones, they need to contact the city offices to see if they do have restrictions and to see what those restrictions are, because they might not want to buy that property after that. And if they didn't know that they were in one of these zones and they thought, hey, I'm going to build that casita or that pool, and then they're told no, they can't do it, who are they going to blame? They're going to blame, you or the agent or escrow, probably everybody after they purchased that property, because they weren't told about this. So very, very important and mandatory, even though some people on the commercial side think that it's still not. So using that example, the liquefaction and landslide, about 15 years ago, a lot of cities and counties said, this is unacceptable. We're seeing lawsuits for non-disclosure issues. Why isn't the state out there mapping this stuff? Didn't get the state to do it. They went out and mapped their own stuff. We couldn't even do business 15 years ago in San Diego County without having their 8-page liquefaction and landslide report included in our report. They went out and mapped all their own. A lot of cities and counties, and this is, to this day, it's even more so. They're really looking at their own backyards. They're really mapping out additional disclosures, tsunami disclosures for the coast, wind advisories, soil erosions, different disclosures the local governments, whether it be the city or county, are doing on their own. And sometimes the federal law has actually, told them that they have to do some of these things to address local hazard mitigation planning because the state is not doing it. We provide local data to address those needs. Basically, if it's a disclosure that's been part of the safety element of that general plan for that county, it's an approved map, we're basically putting it in our report. And it's basically to protect yourselves from liability, because remember, these are not mandatory to disclose. No local disclosures, whether on the residential and definitely not on the commercial side, are mandatory to disclose, except for like the AB 38 that just happened with residential. Those are local maps, and there's going to be a new one called SB 63 that's coming out. That's going to affect commercial as well, that are local mapping that needs to be disclosed. It's going to be mandatory to disclose, especially for the residential side of things. So again, if it's a local map by the city or county, it's been approved, we're putting in our reports, and that's protect you, your sellers, from liability, because we all know that the number one reason for lawsuits in the real estate industry is non-disclosure, whether it's an actual knowledge item that the sellers should have told the buyer about, that they live next to a high construction zone and it's going to be noisy. better tell them, or if it's, something like this, that's not mandatory to disclose, MyNHD provides that information for you guys. That's to protect you or your clients. If the information's available, basically we've seen the lawsuits going back as far as 20 years now when this local stuff started being done. The judge is basically saying, I did not know this local disclosure exists, is not a reason or an excuse. Basically, due diligence, you as the agent being the expert in the area, that's what they're saying. You should have known that that map exists, or you should have used a third-party provider that provides that information, local information. Yes, it's not required by law. That doesn't exempt you from giving it to a potential buyer. So that's what we've seen in the lawsuit. So that's why this stuff is definitely going to be in the MyNHD reports. Because failure, like this says, failure to disclose this local data can definitely create liability for everybody. So this is just a kind of a visual kind of portion of this. This is what the San Bernardino County flood map looks like. Looks very, very similar to the residential, not the residential, the FEMA flood zone, the federal and state kind of FEMA flood mapping, but they do their own mapping. And you're gonna see on some of these things, like this is the Orange County fire zones. This map is old as of like probably a month ago. These zones are changing. They're being reworked and remapped right now because of the new AB 38 and fires that have been going on, like I said. But you're going to see, like on that statutory form, those state maps, the fire zones, those two zones. Maybe the state mapped you as not being in a fire zone. And then in the local portion of the NHD report, you're going to see the city of Orange County said, you are in a fire zone, a high fire zone. And then clients are calling us saying, okay, the state says no, the county's saying yes. Who's right? Well, legally, we can't say exactly who's right. We're definitely siding with the local government. We're definitely siding, in this example, Orange County. This is their own backyard. They have more invested in their mapping process. They have more invested in stopping lawsuits and liability actions against the city or the county and against sellers of property. So if the state says one thing and the city or county mapping says something else on a fire map, or they map earthquake fault zones, they map fire, they map floods, and they might differ in their answers. So just know that might happen. We still have to provide the approved maps, so all the information is provided for liability concerns. But if the question needs to be asked, who's right on the same sort of thing, who mapped it right, we just think that the counties or cities have probably invested more in their mapping process because they have more invested in why it's being mapped, if that makes sense to everybody. So you might see that happening on your reports as well. So what else is not mandatory for commercial that is mandatory for residential? Certain taxes are mandatory to disclose on the residential NHD report to give to potential buyers. No taxes are required for commercial at all. It is not mandatory. I know we're all muted here, and I usually ask, do we know why it's mandatory to disclose on the residential certain taxes like Melrose and 1915 bonds? And that's due because there's special circumstances attached to Melrose that aren't attached to some of these other direct assessments, your Prop 13, your county taxes, that sort of thing. And I'll get back to that in a second, but this is a sample of our tax report. And man, I wish my tax bill looked like this. It breaks down everything down to the minute detail. What your county taxes are, the ad valorem taxes, the percentage it is, all the direct assessments. The number 2 line here is a Melrose Facilities District, and they're called different things. We'll always highlight the fact that if there's a Melrose or a 1915 bond, and these are the bonds that developers use to build schools and green belts and parks for the subdivisions and stuff like that. They use them as a tool to help pay for it and pass along the cost to the taxpayer, basically the people that buy the houses. So they're going to be highlighted here, but the tax report itself, not besides Melrose and 1915 bonds, is awesome because it provides exactly what that seller is currently paying down to the dime, down to the penny. So it's going to give a potential buyer great information on what that commercial property is going to cost them in taxes. There's a tax calculator that's inside there too, put in a new purchase price for that commercial property. All this stuff is automatically input, all the direct assessments and the ad valorem tax, and it's going to give them what their new tax liability is going to be if they pay for it at this new price, and also supplemental tax bill calculators in there as well. But commercial properties are affected by 1915 bonds and Melrose too. And the reason why it became a law for residential is because there's an accelerated foreclosure notice on Melrose and 1915 bonds. If you're having a problem, I usually ask this too, but if you have a problem paying your property taxes, how long until the county can start foreclosure proceedings on you for not paying property taxes? It's 5 years. So 5 years, and then the county can start foreclosure proceedings for non-tax payments. If you have a Melrose or 1915 bonds, they can start within 90 to 180 days, depending on how the language in that bond is written. That's a huge difference between 5 years that somebody has in their mind that, you know, I'm having a problem paying my property taxes, I'm working on it, I'm trying to get this fixed, and having foreclosure proceedings start within 180 days. That's why it became law on residential, but it's not mandatory to disclose on commercial. The MyNHD report is going to definitely provide that information with you in every single report, just for the basic price. So no extra. So it's very important. Again, something that's not mandatory on commercial properties, something that we're going to give you and make sure that you're notified about, and your buyers are going to be notified about for liability reasons. With a Melrose or 1915 bond, there is a like a notification that needs to be given that gives additional information, and that's going to be down here. This number 1 is right here, and it's basically what the current levy is, what the maximum tax rate is it could go up to, what the ending year is, in this case 2050, and then also what it can go up every single year. It can go up 2% per year in this example. So it gives that buyer additional information saying, hey, this is not going to stay static. It can keep increasing 2% every year, and this is what the maximum it can go up to. And then if they have questions, they can call. We also hear that if people are actually having problems paying their property taxes or county taxes, that they can call this Melrose number and negotiate paying just the Melrose part to avoid that accelerated foreclosure from actually starting a process. So they can partial pay just the Melrose or 1915 bonds to try and, you know, stop that accelerated foreclosure notice. We've heard that that's been negotiated, and it probably depends on the county and if they're able to do something like that in their bylaws and all that. So so that's another notification that'll have to be in there, especially on the residential side, but we put it in our commercial as well. How are we doing on time? I think we're doing pretty good. Okay. So this one's really important in my professional opinion. This is something that should be mandatory to disclose, especially on commercial, but even on the residential side. It's the environmental disclosures. Now on commercial, that's something that's got a whole bunch more things that kind of go with it. Commercial properties have, you know, spills and chemical leaks and water damage and just a lot more things going on than a residential subdivision might have going on. You know, that's been, you know, dealt with at the beginning of the process when the developer was starting things with a vacant, you know, plot of land. So it provides information about properties' proximity to a known environmental site. All environmental sites are found in public databases, and this is what we search and provide. Provides detailed information to the agent and buyers regarding known environmental sites in the area. And remember this, an environmental screening report ordered early in the sales process for a commercial property especially, can provide the agent with any potential red flags on the sale of the property. And this is important, not just for commercial. I think it's a little bit more important for commercial on the environmental side, but I think it's important for residential properties, commercial properties. With MyNHD, and I'll admit some other companies do it as well, but not all. But MyNHD, if you don't close, you don't get paid for your sale, we don't get paid. Okay, there's no cancellation fees. We shed a tear with you, but we don't need a reason why your escrow didn't close or it didn't go through. Just let us know it canceled so we can wipe it off the books. We know that sales aren't going to happen. We know there's going to be some that are going to cancel. There's no reason for any sort of cancellation fees, but there's also no reason not to order this early in the process. God love our escrow clients. We love them too. And we know there's a lot of them that offer to order the NHD or maybe some other settlement services. As far as the NHD report, there's no reason to wait. This is a right of rescission document, okay? So if you wait till escrow on this, commercial property, it took you, 3 to 5 months just to get to escrow, all that blood, sweat, tears, money, time spent to get this into escrow. And now you've provided this right of rescission document to a potential buyer that one of two things may happen. They either have buyer's remorse and can use this right of rescission document to back out of a deal saying, nope, there was something in here I didn't like, I'm going to back out of the deal. And they can use this as a right of rescission, or they actually see something, whether it's a flood zone they didn't know about, a fire zone that you didn't know about, or something in this environmental report or on the taxes, but mainly on the environmental report, that scares them. And now they don't want to buy the property. Wouldn't you want to have known this 3 to 5 months ago when you took the listing? Order your reports at the time of listing, no risk to you or your client to do so. No cancellation fees with MyNHD. Order it, and you can see red flags. Is it going to have insurance issues? Oh my God, there was a chemical spill a block away. Is my client going to be worried about that on this commercial property? It just makes sense not to give a right of rescission when you've gotten to escrow. Get it up front, know what the red flags are so you can work around them if you can, or if you can't, you're avoiding liability, you're avoiding the blood, sweat, and tears of escrow and them, dropping escrow at that point. So just, my advice is to always do that. So when I came over to this company, and so this is just a little history lesson. So basically, because there's only 6 mandatory disclosures on the commercial side of sales here on the NHD world, 99.9% of all disclosure companies, they take the word commercial and they slap it on their residential report. Because remember, their residential report requires so much more, and it's got the 6 mandatory disclosures in it already. So they're not really providing you a commercial report. They're providing you what is mandatory by law, which includes the 6 mandatory things, and everything else is residential. When I came to this company, I said, that's not good enough. A residential report provides 7 environmental disclosures. I think one other company does 11 on the residential side. We expanded ours to be 28 state and federal databases. And this is if you know what a phase 1 is, which is a site inspection that a buyer has to do when they're buying a commercial property. If there's a lender involved, lender is usually going to require 99.9% of the time that buyer go get a phase 1, and that's a site inspection. They go, they measure the property, they do soil things, they look at a historical record search of the property. That's basically what our screening report is. It's the historical record search. Is there anything that's happening on that property or within 1 mile surrounding that property that's an environmental concern that's being mapped out by state or federal agencies? And it's within a quarter mile, half mile to 1 mile away, or if there's something happening actually on the property. Depending on the database, that's the distance that's searched from the property. Each database is going to have its own type deal. So we expanded ours to 28 state and federal databases to make this a commercial centric report. And to have these red flags in the beginning is very, very important. Well, no matter when you order the report, but please try and order them at the beginning just to kind of protect yourselves. I'll probably repeat that a lot because I'm very passionate about that. So very, very detailed report. It's going to be pretty much what you get in the phase 1 report as far as the historical record searches. Nice little map. I'll show you in a minute, and then you can just click on the page numbers and it'll take you right to it. The map is going to be very similar to this. We're kind of updating our map a little bit, but it's going to have a legend here at the bottom. It's going to show the property in the middle, and it's going to show the quarter mile, half mile, 1 mile radius, and then everything that's being monitored for environmental issues. This is super fun sites, landslides. I'm sorry, not landslides, landfills, chemical spills, underground leaking tanks. Good example of that, gas stations when they're roped off, which you see a lot of the time. It's because their tanks are leaking underground. The gas and the chemicals are getting into the soil and the groundwater. So those are mapped out. Underground leaking tanks are a very big one. especially here in California. You'll see that a lot on these maps. So buyers are going to be very cautious about environmental issues, especially for the environmental side of thing. You're not going to see as many environmental things in a subdivision on the residential side. Like the super fun sites, the really big, nasty things are going to be something that's notated for residential for sure, is it anywhere within that subdivision, just to give people knowledge. But the commercial report is definitely more commercial centric and going to really highlight all the issues that are surrounding these commercial industrial type properties. And hey, is that going to, affect that buyer's decision to buy? If it is, let's find out about it when I get the listing, order the environmental report. It's an add-on. It's like $15 more from our low price anyway. But I want to make it mandatory across the board. And we're hearing rumblings that California might be starting to head that way to make these environmental issues mandatory, not just for residential, but for also commercial. So that's one that I would support. I think sometimes there's a little bit of overreach in some things, but I think this one's an important one. So some basics now. Who should order the NHD report? Well, it's the responsibility of the seller's agent to order this report. Escrow officer can do this, obviously, but I would suggest doing it at the time you get the listing. And if you represent the buyer, ask the listing agent for a copy as soon as you can in the deal, so you can see if there's any red flags that your buyer's gonna be nervous about. How can we help you? Well, these things are coming back within 5 minutes right now. Our system is so awesome. Our customer service team is the best. The best way to do it is just go to our website, just put in your name, the property address, and click submit. It's really super easy, like 5 minutes to do. We do this 24/7. We're doing it on the weekends. We have people working on the weekends. We know my mom's been an agent for 40 years. I've ordered these things for her on the weekends, but we know people, forget about things. And so we're here for you. Easy access to all the hazard books. They're online. They come as an electronic PDF with every, report delivery, liability protection. Know who you're doing business with. There's so many. You got to look at the terms and conditions, and I'm at fault for doing this, not doing this too. Know what's in there, what they would protect you with if they make an error in omission. What kind of insurance they have. Do they force you to go to arbitration either in Fresno or down to San Diego? And that's your only recourse. What kind of conditions are they putting on you if they make an error? Lots of lawsuits. You can Google NHD lawsuits if you want to. We've never been hit with any sort of lawsuit or a claim against our E&O, which we're very proud of. So just check terms and conditions. I think it's very important just to kind of see if you're not using us. Heck, please read ours too. Every report of ours is backed by $10 million insurance, California company, which is Farmers. Like I said, paid through ESCO, no canceled orders. Commercial NHD is $89.95. If you add the environmental, it's $109. Still very, very cheap compared with the phase one that the commercial people are going to have to do. Starts out at $1,500 and goes up, based off the size of the property. This gives you pre-phase one kind of information on the environmental side of it. Plus it gives you all your commercial NHD and tax that's mandatory and not mandatory to protect you from liability. I suggest getting the environmental, but make sure you're getting the NHD and tax for sure. How to order, like I said, this is kind of repetitive, sorry. Website or phone number. Contact myself directly. I'll show you that in a minute, or your awesome representative there. I think she's on the phone with us here too, Sage Gomez. I know she works really close with your organization, so you can contact her directly. We're a team. I run the commercial division. She runs the residential side of things out there for your area. But we're a team. Either one of us can help you guys out. If you have a relationship with Sage, call her directly. Call me directly. Here's my information. If you want to write it down, I'll leave it up for a minute. I run the commercial division for MyNHD for the state of California. It's Rob at mynhd.com. Number is 951-532-6824. And Cecilia has all this information. If you miss something, she can definitely provide it out there as well. And then lastly, we were kind of talking about this before we let everybody into the room, but some people were talking about commercial leases and are there requirements for leases? And it's not mandatory to disclose, but a lot of our clients, especially in the last couple of years, have been asking us for this. So very excited to announce this. This is pretty much brand new. This is our new commercial lease disclosure report. This protects your owners it informs tenants by disclosing potential natural hazards that may affect the property and the insurance rates. So an owner wants to protect themselves from liability. You know, some owners are getting worried, you know, that the fire came through here, got close to here. I should be telling my leaseholders if my property is close to or in a fire zone, they might want to go get fire insurance, you know, renter's insurance on their goods and their personal stuff, or on the building, you know, not on the building, the stuff that they have inside. It protects the owners from any potential liability. Even though it's not mandatory, it doesn't mean that a buyer cannot sue you, or a leaseholder cannot sue that owner for not telling them that they were in an earthquake zone, and an earthquake hit and all their stuff broke on the inside of that building. It doesn't protect them from not telling them that they were in a fire zone and the building burned down and all their possessions. It's just a liability protection for the owners, and it forms the tenants. So if they want to, they can go out and get some insurance for their goods that they have inside the building that they're renting. It basically is the state disclosures. So it's the flood, the dam failure, the very high fire, the wildland fire, the earthquake, and the seismic hazard zones. And there's a water conserving fixtures advisory that CAR advises to let buyers or leaseholders know about. So we put that in there as well. It's still covered by our $10 million V&O insurance. It's paid for at the time of ordering, though. It is a credit card order. It's not something it's not a sale. There's no escrow involved. This is strictly for the people that want to have that liability protection and to inform their tenants. Still 15 minutes, even less than that, turnaround time or less. 6 pages, 1 signature page, and it's still got the aerial photos, you know, with the QR codes. You just click on the code and it brings up the maps for you. It's really cool. I hope some of you guys are interested in that. Let me know if you have any questions about that as well. But really, that is me in a nutshell. That was the end. And I hope well, we're all muted, so hopefully there was no people that fell asleep or snoring on me here. But hopefully I answered some questions that you might have had, and if not, hopefully you have some questions. So with that, thank you, Cecilia and Mr. Lee and Fong and Sage. I think you're still here, but I'm good. Thank you, guys.
I want to ask the audience whether they have any particular questions that they can raise, and then type it in the chat room, and I will relay that question to Rob. Rob, I have some questions.
Sure.
Who is the arbitrators of all these informations? And I heard in your presentation that insurance company, for financial reasons, that they want to extend the territory a little bit bigger, and then maybe there's no data for that. How do we make that decision?
I don't know.
Now all of a sudden, you know, they don't want to sell the guy insurance if, you know, whatever.
Yeah, I don't know if anybody's
the buyer worry about that.
I don't know if anybody's taken any of the insurance companies to court because the NHD says you're not in a high fire zone, but then the insurance companies either denying them insurance or raising their insurance rates. It's really, I think the final arbiter is really going to be the insurance company, unfortunately. They're pretty powerful as far as this stuff goes. The resource that a buyer is going to have are very limited, except maybe going to that California FAIR plan, like I said, as far as the fire insurance goes, to try and help them out if they're being denied insurance. But we have to provide the maps that the Department of Forestry and CAL FIRE have put out for the state of California, and also provide the maps that the county and city governments are putting out. They're the arbitrators as far as the NHD disclosures and as far as protecting yourselves from liability goes for your clients, and also the liability protection from the buyers to them. You've disclosed what is required by law. Your seller has provided to a buyer. The buyer has no recourse against you or the seller because the insurance companies are not going with the approved maps. That's really between the buyer and the insurance company and their insurance company. That's the best I think I can describe it to you. Good.
Fong, I think Sage has a question and she wants to talk to Rob live, and she can unmute. Can we help her?
Got
Hi,
it.
Rob.
Thank
Yeah.
you. I
Okay.
appreciate it. Just 2 comments. Thank you, Rob, so much. He's basically all by himself and he does everything. So if you want to connect with him, go reach for him because he's amazing. Also, I just wanted to say that MyNHD, we have this amazing tool that say that you're curious about your own home or you're representing a buyer or you just want to know. We have a great tool. If you text me or if you want to contact Rob, we can tell you whether or not a property is in a flood or fire zone for free. So it's not an NHD, but it's just a quick little tool that's going to tell you whether or not a property is in a flood or fire zone. It's going to look exactly like the aerial maps that Rob was going over. And why not utilize that right now? Because right now is to think out of the box, outside of the box, and do something other agents aren't doing. And I know I'm familiar with a lot of you guys here, and I have placed some commercial orders for you. But if you need a very specific question answered, Rob is the guy. So thank you, Rob. I appreciate you coming out for us. I know you're busy. So just thank you again.
Thank you, Sage. Anytime. And you know what? Thank you for bringing that up. I do forget that we have this cool tool sometimes, and to mention it to our clientele. It's a great thing. It's just something that we have access to. And your own personal property, like Sage said, or your client's interested in this, but you're not ready to pull the trigger yet, but you're curious if it's in a flood zone or a high fire zone, text or call me or Sage, give us the property address and APN. We'll look it up and we'll be able to provide a map, send it back to you and say, here's what it's showing. So you know kind of in advance before even ordering an NHD. So we have that, service for you as well. Thanks, Sage. Appreciate it. Have a great day. Stay dry out there.
Wow. And another question on existing homes, the chances that the status changing in the hazard zone is fairly minimal, right? Let's say if I buy a house in the 1950s, 60s, and someone has been living there for a while, I go in and buy. So chances of me running into NHD difficulties or challenges is minimal. Whereas on a new development, let's say a developer who go in and buy a piece of land, maybe close to a landfill, should I assume that he took the initiative and do all the due diligence in surveying the environmental hazard before the city will even allow him to develop a project on top or close to that piece of land?
You should assume that the developer did what they legally had to do to mitigate any sort of, like your example, there was a landfill near and they mitigated the methane gas stuff underneath and chemical leaks underground or whatever. New homes, if you were going to buy a new home in a new subdivision, they are also required to give a buyer a new home disclosure report. So you will also get a new home report as well. And that's going to be, some of the same disclosures. And not every company does the environmental, but MyNHD is going to do the environmental as well. So we'll be able to tell you if there's anything still being monitored on that new home lot on the environmental side for, 1 mile away as well, depending on the databases. So that's coming up as well. But disclosures do change. If you bought a resale property, somebody's been living there since the 50s and they never had to pay flood insurance, FEMA may have just changed their flood mapping and now it's going right through the middle of that property. And it didn't before. You buy the property, they say, oh no, I never paid flood insurance, don't worry about it. Well, you better be checking your disclosure report because the maps do change. And all of a sudden now you have flood insurance and you're going to look at that seller and say, that's, but that's what the disclosure report is for. Her knowledge might be wrong, but you make sure you're looking at that disclosure report to see exactly what's going on. But maps do change, yes.
An example I can think of is a couple of years ago when we have a lot of wildfires up north, City of Paradise was just totally wiped out. So in that case, sometimes you cannot gamble on an existing piece of land is not marked in a new NHD.
Yeah, depending on what the land is being used for, I know a lot of those properties, and to that point too, especially the City of Paradise that got destroyed like that, the legislation that came out, like on these AB 38 fire maps and this new SB 63 one, are only dealing with residential. Well, that City of Paradise had a ton of commercial properties as well, but it's not required to disclose, you know, these new fire maps for commercial properties. Well, guess what? MyNHD, not all companies do this. MyNHD provides the AB 38 mapping as well as the new SB 63 one that's not going to be required for commercial, but it's there to protect for commercial, even though it's not mandatory. It's very strange that all this stuff is required for residential and not on commercial. And I think
totally agree with you.
I think it's, you know, having been in the industry for, you know, 22 years and working on residential and commercial, I don't want to say it's an old boys club, but I still think it's just that mentality of buyer beware, buyer, go do your due diligence. This is on you, buyer, to buy this property. And that's why the legislation hasn't changed for commercial NHD.
Okay.
So buyer beware, but utilize a report that's going to give you everything that's, you know, available that to disclose, you know. So
do we have any questions from the audience? If not, I would like to say thank you to Rob Noble taking his business time. As Sage mentioned that we kind of put an hour of your consultation time. So on behalf of West and Gabriel Valley Associated Realtors and the education community, and also to Cecilia, who helped to invite you to come and talk to us. Thank you for your time in spending with us.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Rob.
Thank you very much.
I will contact you,
everybody.
soon. Okay. Thank you for your time. Thank
And
you.
also-
Have a nice day. Bye.
And also in closing, I would like to say thank you for those people who attended this seminar. I learned a lot personally from Rob, and I hope you have learned something. In case you have further questions on this subject, you can contact Rob. One thing I would like to say is, on behalf of the Education Committee, this will be our last meeting for 2022. In December, since everybody is on holiday mood, we don't have any seminar held. But we are still working on 2023. Just to let you be aware, in February 2023, we have the privilege of inviting Oscar Way, who is a car economist, to come and help us to steer through these troubled waters. Because with interest rate going up, inflation is going up, gasoline is going up, I think you might be interested in attending our February seminars to see what Oscar has to say about the current economy. Other than that, I want to wish you guys have a happy Thanksgiving and spend some family time with someone you love and your own family, children, parents, grandparents, and grandkids. Have a very Merry Christmas. And last thing, if you want to go to vote, today is your last day. Thank you. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. Thank you, everybody.